really understanding that connection between heart and impact and actions can be transformative and be that aha moment for all of us to maybe step into greater growth and learning.
Hello there, it's me, Steve Meller, and welcome in to GrowthReady, the podcast that allows high performers to reveal the reality behind what it means to ready yourself for growth, the personal and professional challenges along the growth journey, while also allowing the high-performance executive coach in me to satisfy his curiosity toward what drives optimal performance. Joining us is leadership consultant Katie Anderson, and Katie's mission is to empower change leaders who can see what is possible for their organizations if they were able to cultivate a learning culture, all to ensure that leaders are ready to be a part of long-term growth. Okay, welcome back into the most recent episode of GrowthReady. I am so excited to be diving into a conversation today with Katie Anderson. Katie, we're going to get to know all about you as we go through the course of this conversation. But before we do any of that, let's answer the opening question that I have everybody answer to begin with. Katie, what does it mean to you to be growth ready?
Growth ready for me is all about having a learning mindset. So, we can call it a growth mindset, but a learning mindset, being open to seeing every experience as an opportunity for learning. If we didn't achieve our goal, that's okay if we're learning something from it. And the more we can reframe everything as a bit of an experiment and a learning process, we're going to not only be personally more satisfied by the outcomes of any specific thing we're trying to do or accomplish, but also we're going to get better at getting better. And it's going to be the part that where we're truly growing and learning and improving. And maybe next time we're going to be that much more ready for success.
Absolutely. Getting better at getting better. I'm all about it. And we're all about it on here. And, we were chatting it up and, I think we could have just kept talking without even recording the podcast, to be honest. That happens sometimes. We just immediately click up before we started recording. And a lot of our stories, and so there's certainly some alignment and some similarities across our worlds is how we've come to where we are today and doing what it is we're doing. But Katie, bring our listeners a little bit up to speed just in terms of the here and now. What does a day in the life of Katie Anderson look like at the moment, and what's the sort of work that you're doing today?
Well, there is no one day in the life because there's so much variability, but maybe a quarter in the life of Katie Anderson, because the work I do is all centered around helping organizations and their leaders become more effective at learning and getting better at getting better, as we said. And that takes a lot of different formats. So I lead learning trips for leaders to go to Japan, where I lived for 2 years, to learn about the Japanese Kaizen or continuous improvement mindset and so much more. I help leaders through coaching from behind the scenes to help them think about how they're getting better. And I work with organizations and now there's so much more in person, leading leadership retreats or workshops that are really going to be that boost of energy and outside perspective that's helping them sort of maybe break out of a pattern of behavior and see the possibilities for something new. So a quarter in the life is, some weeks here working in my home office around with my family. Other weeks see me on the road traveling to Europe, Japan, Australia, wherever it may be. And also being present and available with my family too. So trying to find I like to say no one day is balanced or even, but, over the course of the month or the quarter, how am I creating balance in prioritizing the things that are important for me personally, professionally, and so much more.
Love it. And again, shame on me for even asking the question that way, because again, very similar. I don't even know why I'm asking that question the way I'm asking it, because quite frankly, I can answer it the same way you just answered it. So I think that's a great place for us to start here, especially with this concept of learning too. And again, the moment in this day and age, whenever someone mentions this notion of learning mindset, and I think, just to almost build upon what you were just touching on a little when you first answered that first question, is that learning mindset, you could say growth mindset, but I think we're going to get to why and how those two things are in fact somewhat different. And it's important for us to understand that because at the heart of the learning piece, I think where we get stuck in this day and age is that we believe, that we can access any information and all information because we have the power of Google, because we have the power of the internet, whatever it may be. But to your point, learning is through doing. That's what I'm hearing straight away. Learning is through doing more than it is through reading, more than it is through hearing, or whatever it may be. So I would love to, as the coach that I am, I always like to try to frame things to the best of our ability before we go really get into the weeds with the concept. So when I say something like learning mindset, and you're obviously utilizing it all the time, try to help our listeners really understand at its core maybe what it is that you're obviously working on with that.
So the way I see the learning mindset, manifesting is that it's not, we can learn obviously a concept or gain some knowledge through books and, going to a workshop or hearing a podcast, but we don't really embody that learning until we've put it into practice. And that's where that growth really comes in. And so that's where I see some of the connection between our personal growth is how are we applying what we're learning, either through the knowledge. I see so many, one of the gaps I saw for myself as a leader, and this is what I also help, executives and change practitioners learn too, is we may know what good coaching looks like. We may have read some books, or we know what good leadership is. We've all had that experience, but we have habits and other experiences that maybe are getting in our way, and we're not aligning our behaviors really with that impact we want to have. And actually there's a phrase behind me for those of you who are watching the video on YouTube. I have some Japanese calligraphy of the word intention. And it's always been a really powerful word for me. I discovered something more when I moved to Japan and I needed business cards made. I didn't have any. I just started my own consulting practice, and really, who gives out business cards these days? But there is, you do in Japan. And so I had the word for intention put on my card, and I discovered a deeper meaning of that word. And it's the top part of the word comes from symbols meaning samurai and heart. So like the strength of your heart. And the lower symbol is a compass or direction. And so I see that we need to, it's about embodying our intention, putting into practice our intention. So we need to take the actions to really align with the person we want to be. And that's where the growth comes in. So we may intellectually know something, but without the doing and the action, and probably a lot of failures along the way and how we're learning from that, we're not really going to be that fully embodied, output of our growth that we desire.
Yeah. And gosh, I don't want to go to intention yet because we're going to spend a bunch of time on that, because the moment you brought it up, I was like, oh, intention, we definitely need to go to that. But the embodying this learning mindset through practice, something just to sort of really help people understand and see some of your life's work and your story and your journey. You talk about learning. Stanford graduate, all right? So we all know, you use a word like Stanford, everyone's just like, oh, educated, And so that's a big, synonym, if you will, with this notion of learning with higher education. And so from there, you've been very well traveled, and you've gone around the world and worked in different cultures, different environments. And I'm just curious, like when you think about that journey, and I'm sure there's many, many moments where something like this maybe came to fruition, but what might be one moment along that journey where you were able to say, you know what, it was in this moment that I saw the power of this very work that you're doing today? Was it something you lived yourself? Was it something you saw or exposed to? I'm just curious.
There are so many different moments throughout my journey. I'm almost a half a century old. And so, it's hard to say any one specific moment, but to me, it's the accumulation of a few things. And a handful of years back, I did the Clifton Strengths Finder assessment. And what I found really interesting is my number one, skill or attribute is learner. And the second one is achiever. And so those two have really played a really integral role in the trajectory of my life, because the achiever is always seeking like new challenges, new accomplishments, new things to do. But what's made me be able to be successful in that and navigate the challenges is the learner mindset. I've continued to choose to go to countries that I didn't know anyone. I moved to the UK after university. I moved to Australia on a Fulbright scholarship and ended up staying for 4.5 years, where I did my master's and working. And those were really, really hard challenges. And I think some of it was allowing myself to feel uncomfortable And when unexpected things happened, we talk about growth. I think there can be times where we have unexpected growth opportunities and more planned growth opportunities. Absolutely. So more planned growth opportunities like, oh, I want to achieve something new or want to grow a new skill, or, other times things happen in your life that were unexpected. And it's about how you respond to those unexpected moments that really are the opportunities for real growth. So one example of that is I moved to Australia. I had a whole plan for how my Fulbright research was going to go, and I showed up, and the whole program I'd put together and the researcher I'd designed my whole program with, it just was not what I expected it to be. And I realized within a few months that this was not going to be a good situation. And I could have either just sort of stayed stuck and frustrated by that, or I could have figured out how to do something different. So I was like, okay, I have two choices here. And I decided in that moment I needed to do something different. And so I put all the balls in motion to make new connections, and I actually changed universities, switched everything, changed my whole, thesis topic. But that was a real shift for me. I felt really stuck. Like, oh my God, I had been planning this whole thing for years and it's not what I expected. And so you have to sit with that. But then, and that decision actually put me on a trajectory for a totally different career path that's led me to other changes in my career path that's led to what I do today. And then there's times where we have that planned growth where it's like, I want to learn a new skill, and how do you still use that learning mindset to help you? But it's really, how do we create the conditions within ourselves that we can either choose challenges to move towards or respond to challenges that come our way? And how do we move towards better or through those processes more effectively? And to me, that's really what the learning and the growth mindset and practices are about.
No doubt. And I think the creating of the conditions there, as you alluded to, comes all the way back to that word intention that we've already used. And there's a sense of initiative too, in the sense of, hey, I actually love how you use that term navigation for when it comes to the learning piece. And it is in fact serving us as the navigator if we allow it to, right? And if we try to force it and we try to insist upon, no, this is how it's supposed to be, then we're not learning, are we? We're actually resisting that ability to learn.
Yeah. And it's not that we need to deny all of our feelings or experiences. It's okay to feel frustrated. It's okay to feel disappointed. But we have to get better at moving through that and then saying, okay, so now what am I going to do? How can I reflect? How can I what actions do I need to do differently? Or what positive aspect can I take from this situation that wasn't, what I wanted it to be? And that's really, part of our maturity as human beings, is how we respond to those challenges. And then how do we apply that to the things that we are, planfully wanting to grow into and still using that mindset?
Yeah. And even just referencing maturity, again, I'll be 40 next year. I've got a 4-year-old and a 5-year-old. There's every single day, at some point every day, silly Steve shows up, and some would argue from watching from outside, this guy's pretty immature. He's all this kind of stuff, and some jokes I laugh at still to this day. It's like, okay, come on, dude, it's time to grow up. But what I'm hearing is that from a maturity standpoint, it's that ability for us as learners, as navigators of this life, to not simply just keep falling for the same traps that life is actually presenting us.
Well, right. That's the only true failure, is if we keep doing the same thing and getting the same outcome over and over again. But if we can use that as an opportunity for growth. I actually want to share with you this is a Daruma doll. These are from Japan. Actually, this one I'm showing is very decorated, not the traditional all red.
I love it.
But they are these dolls that represent the Japanese proverb, fall down 7 times, get up 8. And I became obsessed with them when I lived in Japan, and now I have a huge collection behind me, and I give them out all the time. But they're like little weeble wobbles, and they literally right themselves back up when they fall down. And when you have a goal, you fill in the doll's left eye. And then it waits and is a visual reminder of you that it's okay to get knocked down. It's okay to have setbacks. But what's really important is about how you get back up. How are you learning your way forward so that you can eventually achieve your goal and fill in the doll's right eye? So I love it because it's the connection to Japan, but also the perseverance and patience and learning it takes to actually achieve success.
Yes. Oh my God, you're gonna have to send me a link to where I can get my own.
Yeah.
After we're done here, we'll do some very unexpected shopping that I wasn't expecting.
Oh,
to do
Steve,
today.
I'll send you a little package in the mail. I import mine from Japan. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I love it. I love it. Okay, it's time to go back to intention now because I was not aware of some of the origin in that definition and the way in which it's applied, and something that I've said for many years is, I come from sport, and in sport, you're typically working, when you first get into coaching, you're working with folks that have been generations removed from you, and they have their sayings, and it's just like, what good is intention without action? And I hear it all the time. I'm just like, okay, old person, like, stop, calm down. And then as I started to really listen to that and hear those kind of insights, and I started working with athletes, for me, it was like, we've kind of got it all wrong. Like, action can be what action is capable of being when we get intention right, when we do the work around intention on the front end. And I've always been saying, like, intentional action is what we should be all aspiring to. And now to hear this way of describing it with the strength of the heart and the compass of direction, I'm just like, you're blowing my mind right now, Katie. Like, again, this is so beautiful. I'd love you just to kind of speak upon that in terms of how you're maybe helping people not only better understand that, but then take the power of that definition and apply it.
It blew my mind, too, when I first learned of what the symbols meant, because Japanese leaders would say, oh, this is a very powerful word. And I'd say, yes, intention is a powerful word. It means something to me. And then when I really understood sort of the origin of this, I was like, the aha light bulb went off for me. I'm like, yes. Yeah. And there's two things that I really work on, not only for myself, because we have to do, the inner work for ourselves too. And I feel like this concept of intention is what is sort of my North Star. Who do I want to be? And what impact do I want to have? And am I really aligning my actions to achieve that and to do that? And that's what I help leaders do as well. So first, understand and unpack, what is their purpose? What is the impact that they want to have? Who do they want to be? So we need to understand that strength of our heart. And sometimes we just get so focused on the doing. Yeah, no, this is a different type of doing than the doing for learning. This is just the doing. We're just taking action, and we're not taking time to really connect with what's the impact I want to have, or what's really important to me. And then I help leaders reflect on how their actions are aligning or not aligning in the direction of that. And so often, and this is the shift that I had to make when I stepped in from being an independent contributor, or, someone who had excelled and achieved a lot in academics in my early career. And so when you move into a people development role, whether or not you're the leader or manager of teams or groups, or if you're a coach or a facilitator or an internal change leader, your role is not about your expertise and your knowledge. It's about how are you cultivating that of other people. And we have to show up really differently. So we do have how to break the telling habit is what I call it. We have to stop being the one who's telling everyone our ideas, how to do it, how to fix it. How do we show up with more inquiry, asking more questions, holding more space? And so helping leaders see I want to be someone who is growing and developing my team, and seeing that as the way to achieve better outcomes for my organization. Of course we need those business results, but getting everyone else to have the capability and confidence to do that, and seeing that disconnect if I'm the one just jumping in with all the answers, or I'm running around firefighting all the time. I'm not really creating those conditions for people to be successful. So really understanding that connection between heart and impact and actions can be transformative and be that aha moment for all of us to maybe step into greater growth and learning.
Yeah, it's what I'm really hearing here is when we get intention right, it fuels so much of what it is you practice and what it is you do in your work today. And again, that willingness to do the work around intention and to to really be disciplined around the second part. I think we're great at saying, this is what I want.
Yeah.
This is what I would love to have this. Like we're great at that. And we probably have a conversation about that maybe daily in some cases. But that alignment piece of like, hey, so where are you going with these wants and this way of being and doing? Are you actually in alignment in terms of your actions and your follow through? Because that seems to be the part of intention. We're not spending enough time really putting under the microscope and saying, hey, this really is how we make intention successful, or why intention is in fact a failure.
Right. And the key to that is the part that's is the secret sauce of learning, which is reflection. So you need to set your intention or set your goal, and then you need to reflect and say, how did I actually do in that? Like, was my intention and how I was going to show up in that meeting? How did I actually perform? How actually were my, what was challenging for me? What was successful? Reflect and then learn and adjust. And so again, we get so focused on the doing that we're not really having that learning part to see how we're getting better or how we're truly aligning our actions with that set intention. So, it's more like throwing darts and like, yay, sometimes I'm successful and other times I'm not. But the key to learning is taking the time to reflect either in the moment or reflect, with greater perspective.
Yeah. And that second piece really does get to the heart of anyone who's listened to this. Before we really dove into the last 5 minutes, I'm an intentional person. Like when I want something, I go and get it. I go and do it. I go and do it. And to just have that little deeper level of awareness and that ability to reflect, because I would actually love to, because I have some of my own insights around how we can reflect and the art of reflection and the power of reflection. I would love to just simply check in with you here and just say, okay, it's one thing to tell people make the time to reflect, but let's be honest, if we could all just do that because Katie told us to do it,
oh no, it's so
this
hard.
life that we live would be so much easier. So I'd love to maybe just step a little bit into how we can maybe do that better.
Yeah. So absolutely. And first before we do, I want to call out what I see as a distinction between intentions and goals. So I see intention is inwardly focused, like more about who do you want to be? What's your purpose? Like more about being. And then goals is more external, like what do I want to achieve, or what does my team need to achieve and accomplish? And they're connected, because the more you can show up embodying the way you think is going to be most effective will help you achieve your goals. But sometimes there are a lot of external factors about whether or not you can actually achieve your goals, but you can always have control over whether or not you're truly aligning your behaviors with your purpose. So I think that's really,
and just to, but I'm glad that you brought us to that, like that notion of control around that is a key part to this. And I'm so glad that you brought us to that before we moved on to the reflection pieces. Again, that idea that, hey, it's one thing to have goals, it's another thing to have intention, but to understand that those goals sometimes or most of the time are out of our control in terms of happening, but that we can have so much control around intention. And I'm so glad that you kind of double underline that for us, because I think people need to appreciate that the practice of intentionality is how we show ourselves we have the control for it.
Yes, it's how we're personally showing up. And then we can have our goals, and it's like how we're then how we're doing in response to achieving those goals, or maybe not, and how we're learning from those times that we're not achieving it. So, but the power of reflection is so important. And I'm with you. It's like it's so easy for me to say, oh, we need to build in time for reflection, and it's one of the things that is the most easy to cut out, and it happens for me too. But I have gotten better over the last decade and a bit about bringing in more purposeful time for reflection, and even micro reflection. Like I call him like intention pauses and then like micro reflection. So like if you're transitioning into a meeting, like we're wearing so many different hats throughout the day, like you have to show up in different ways based on the purpose of that interaction. So having like what I call intention pause. So we're not reactive, but we're like proactive. Like how do I want to show up right now in this interaction? What are the few things I'm really going to pay attention to? And then having that micro reflection afterwards. And it could even just be in transition of like, how did that go? What did I learn? What would be even better is at the end of the day, maybe taking a few minutes to write down a few thoughts and starting to see that pattern. I challenge leaders in any of my programs, just take 5 minutes a day to reflect on how you did and what you learned. And they, at first it's always like, that's so hard to do. And then so it's usually like the week, but when most people don't do it. And then when they start doing it, they're like, oh, I am learning so much, and it's getting better and easier. So how do we have micro reflections? And then how do we even start building in 5 minutes to have more thoughtful reflections? And then I find having partners to help reflect can be really powerful. Like this process right now between you and me, Steve, is a process for reflection. Having my own podcast, Chain of Learning, is a time for me to reflect and learn and process. Same as writing my book. It was like I learned so much from that. So how we can, in the process of helping Mr. Yoshino reflect on 40 years of his career at Toyota, that was an incredible experience. So there's many different ways we can reflect. We just have to be purposeful about making sure it happens. And even if it's those micro reflections or 5 minutes, that's better than not doing it at all. And as we start to strengthen that habit and strengthen that muscle, it becomes easier and easier.
It is undoubtedly a habit, and it is very much a muscle. And you alluded to it right there. As you initially responded and gave us some of this insight, is if we're willing to make the time, because it is the easiest thing for us to cut out, and it really is. And one thing I've come to notice in terms of as much of that insight that you provided there encourages us to do it, there is nothing more compelling to the power of it when you start to do it and you feel the benefits of it, and then you slowly let it go away.
Yeah.
And like those moments when I have 3, 4, 5 days and I just feel the weight of those 3 or 4 or 5 days, and I just check in, I go, brother, when was the last time you reflected on the last 3, 4, 5 days, that you just took a minute just to breathe and just to say, hey, what's up? Like, how are we doing? How do you feel you've been showing up the last 2 days, 3 days, whatever it may be? And one thing I typically, and I'm curious just about if and when this ever happens to you now, or how it's happened over the years, like for me, it's also a very strong way of emphasizing the power of routine. Like, because for me, whenever I'm out of my routine, travel with the family, all this kind of stuff, the power of reflection, it is all the time, and the commitment that I make to it, it just gets put by the wayside, and I feel it so much. I'm just curious, like, when do you notice in your world, no matter how committed you are to this reflection, that you can sometimes let it slip?
Oh, for sure. I mean, there's some times where I've committed to too much travel or too much doing, and I love the doing. I'm an extrovert. I love the work I do. I love global travel. And when we pack ourselves too full, we don't feel like we have the space or capacity for that reflection. I feel like there's the continuous improvement cycle of plan, do, study, adjust. And sometimes we're just so like plan, do, or just do. So I kind of had those moments of crisis too. Like, okay, so how to challenge myself? All right, how do I just even step away for 5 minutes? How do I say no to something else and take a refresh and a reflection time? And I even did that this last summer. I loved the last, from the fall to the spring, all the work I did and the travel I was doing, but it was a lot. And I realized that I was getting burnt out because I hadn't had time to really reflect and process and sort of stabilize some of the things in my business, but also stabilize sort of the learnings I've had for myself. So I took what I call a sabbatical over the summer. It didn't mean I wasn't working, but I was not doing very much client-facing work, and I did no client travel, so that I had more flexibility and more space in my schedule to work internally in my business, do some stability of processes with with my team members, and created that space for reflection. Because we talk about growth and sort of that planned growth. You also have to stabilize and like solidify to have that sort of platform and basis to be able to take that next stage or that next step up. And so part of mine, it was being intentional about giving myself the space and time to both reflect, but also have the creativity and the time to create that platform, because I do see there is another book I want to write. There is something more I want to achieve, but I needed to have that space to be able to even start thinking about what that next growth leap in my business is going to be.
Yeah, I'm always appreciative when the guests themselves bring us back onto the theme of the show, because again, it's just like there's so much good here that serves growth, and to bring this back around to growth itself and the plan, do, study, adjust idea. Like if we stop at the do every single time, to your point, we're not making that space for what the next step could potentially be, and we're justifying to ourselves that what we're on right now is without a doubt the most important thing that we should be doing. And then in doing that, we're actually limiting ourselves. We're limiting our ability to find something new, to go and learn some more, because we're so consistent about the very thing that we're doing. How did you find that awakening, that moment of like, hey, it's time for me to stop maybe the external stuff and let's turn inwards for a little bit?
Well, it's anchored on one of the comments that you made, where I started to feel just like, overwhelmed. Like I was almost getting frenetic, and it was just, I didn't have space to even respond to things. And it was all just what was in front of me. And I was all excited by that. And of course I want to do great for all my clients and be there for my kids and do all these things. But it was just this realization that I was seeing that if I continued that trajectory of just the doing and the outward giving, that was going to like crash and burn at some point. So you have to build in these times for the reflection in the space to have, to be creative and to stabilize. And not, and I talk with leaders, I work with a lot of executives in large organizations. They don't feel like they have the control over their schedule. And there's all the, I'm my own business owner, so I can, once I make commitments, but I can slow those things down. They don't necessarily feel like they're the master of their destinies in their type of role. And I help them challenge, like, okay, so maybe you can't, right in your capacity right now, take a sabbatical from your work, but part of your work is continuing the work of your business, so it's a different type of work. But how can you can carve out 30 minutes? You can figure out, like, even if it's 10 minutes a day, and maybe you need to have a partner to hold each other accountable. It's like having their gym buddy. You're less likely to cancel on someone else, because it doesn't have to be these huge chunks of time. And I think that can be a real barrier to us feeling like we have the space for reflection or processing. One of the exercises I take people through often in leadership learning workshops is doing 10-minute coaching cycles of just asking open-ended questions to the other person on a problem that they're trying to think through and give feedback. So it's really only like 7 minutes of actual like thinking time. And everyone's like, whoa, I discovered so much, or I made so much progress. And I'm like, see, just even 10 minutes. Right. We can find those 10 minutes. We must. And if we keep sacrificing that, like, we're ultimately going to, not have growth for ourselves, our teams, or our company as well.
Yeah. And this is where we also get in our own way. I think you've even said something along those lines already. Like we can get in our own way with this kind of stuff and convince ourselves that we're not ready for these kind of things, because we're looking at it through this lens, as you just alluded to, that, because I read somewhere that you're supposed to find 10 hours a week to work on fill in the blank. I don't even have 10 minutes.
No.
Well, hey, start with 5. I talk about this with health all the time. I happen to be down in Louisiana. Louisianians would not be, I'm not surprising them by telling them we are one of the unhealthiest places in the United States. It just is. The data's there. And people look at me almost as an oddity, as someone who looks after himself and takes care of himself and all this kind of thing in terms of getting to the gym and all this kind of, how do you do it? How do you do this and be a dad and be a husband and have a business? Like, some days I go to the gym for 20 minutes. That's all I got. I only got 20 minutes today. And so I zoom in there and I've got a 20-minute workout and I zoom on out and I find a way to shower at some point. And like, that's about it. That's all I've got. But sometimes we look at, I don't have an hour to go to the gym, so I'm not going to go to the gym at all. And it's the same with this work that we're talking about here, is that you don't need all the time in the world. You just need to be intentional about the time that you have. And if it's 5 minutes, gosh, it's 5 minutes well spent, right?
And even if it's like driving in the car or while you're in your run, like going for your run or a walk, don't listen to a podcast. Use some of that time just for your like, give yourself the space to think. Yeah. And that's great. It's going to be so much more powerful. We're so used to consuming all the time and like that doing, and we're not giving ourselves that space and that pause time to let our brains reflect. But reflecting's we have to reflect with intention too.
Yeah.
And this is where, I think I mentioned earlier, framing things as experiments is really powerful and helps us with our reflection. Because if we can say, before we do something, if I do X, I expect Y to happen. And then we can say, oh, did that happen or not? Or if not, why not? What was the factors? And it gives us a framework for that reflection. And so it helps us frame everything as experiments. So we're not having to have a perfection. It's that learning mindset. But also then we can reflect on, did what I expect to happen actually happen? And then we can bring that forward to all aspects of the work, including the processes in our business or our organization to actually improve, the outputs of whatever work we're doing. But start with yourself. And when we get better at developing that habit, it comes forward into all aspects of our life.
Yeah, and I love how you use the word inquiry earlier, and I typically use a word like curiosity, but there's something more specific about inquiry. Like I actually, when you said that, I was like, oh, I think that's actually it's almost like a more honed in version of curiosity, because it's attached to that experiential learning. It's your way of saying like, hey, I'm conducting an experiment right now on whatever this part of my life is or whatever part of my business is, and I'm going into it with curiosity. Yeah. But I do have a specific inquiry or two that I'm making.
Yes.
In regards to that.
Right. So I'd almost say that like being a curious person is sort of the descriptor that you want to have for who you are, and an action you can take is inquiring or asking more questions or listening. Right. So that's the way you demonstrate your curiosity is through asking questions and listening. Yeah. Yep.
I love it. And I think some of these specific definitions and actions and behaviors and ways of being, it's so important for our listeners just to sort of understand that there is so much. Like here you were using a term like learning mindset at the beginning, and someone may hear that and just say, okay, that's like a one size way of doing something. It's like A plus B equals C, and it's just like, no, that's not what it is at all. It's you take the concept that is learning mindset and you make it work for you. You make it work for you in a way that serves you and your growth, because that's what's come through in abundance through this conversation, Katie, is there's so many different ways and different types of person that can go about incorporating and embodying a learning mindset. You don't have to be a set type of person to embody and apply that learning mindset. Any walk of life, any experience, any background, you can make learning mindset work for you based on, again, going back to those intentions. What is it you want and why is it you want it?
Yes. And I'd say, what is it you want to be and why do you want to be that way? And then what are the goals you want to achieve or the external things? So differentiating between the intention and the goals, and how do you partner those two together?
Yeah. And we get into the end, and Katie, this is one of those conversations we could easily just keep going for many, many hours. But I do want to bring this now just to, at the heart of it, high performance, because so much of what we bring to in this podcast is geared towards folks. Yes, we take on the concept of growth. Yes, we want to be ready for everything that comes with it, but we are on these missions, typically those that are listening, I want to get better. I want to get to this certain level. And when you think about just the way in which you've used that learning mindset with the many high performers that you've worked with, including yourself, what is it you see works for these high performers about learning mindset? Why is this concept of learning mindset so necessary for the high performer?
Yeah, there's a great distinction that Eduardo Briseño makes about performing and learning in these two different zones and knowing what we're in. I actually talked with him on my podcast, Chain of Learning, episode 5. And he worked really closely with Carol Dweck, who also was on my podcast, about how we need to leverage our growth mindset and our learning, our learning zone to be able to be high performers and distinguish when can we be more of a learner and when are the stakes high and we actually need to have our high performance. Now, you could relate to this for being, a competitive swimmer. All your practice, all those practice sessions, watching the videos, getting feedback from your coach, that's a time for the learning. And then when you're in the race, like you're going to give it your all. Now you still want to have a learning mindset that if, how you can keep improving after that, but you're going to give, like, that's the moment where you're trying to perform and do your best. Now you may not actually achieve your goal, and then how do you learn after it? But distinguishing when are those moments for you that can be more of a learning opportunity, and when are the times that, like, you really are just driving towards, that high performance. But the more we can always have that concept of, even when we're in that high performance zone, we need to learn afterwards, and then that will continue to build us and get even better and better. But we tend to get stuck in this high performance zone all the time, where we feel like we have to be performing and being great and perfect, and like that's exhausting. So it's like, how can we switch some of that and distinguish more of how we can frame things as experiments, reflect a bit more, and not feel like every single moment of our day has to be high performance.
Yeah, thank you for framing it that way. Simply because you're allowing high performers listening to this to say, hey, you know what? I can give myself a little bit of a break from time to time. The stakes aren't always high. It's not always life and death. Yep. Frankly, it should never be life and death.
No,
but the point being is, like, hey, I get it. There's those moments where things are on the line and we are trying to get out of whatever it is we put our heart and soul into the absolute best result. But to your point, when those moments come and then they go, what do we learn from that result? And then how do we take that into our next phase of development, phase of training, whatever it might be? But understand that maybe the stakes don't always need to be at their highest, because it sounds as though when we do that, we actually don't make space for the learning mindset to be optimized, is what I'm hearing.
Yes, absolutely. So that, again, we talked about that sense of, for leaders, like running around, they're firefighting and they feel like they have to be the high performers all the time, doing. Where can we slow down and be like, whoa, this actually can be a little bit more of a learning opportunity. Not everything is a crisis or the number one top performing moment. And just being able to distinguish that can be really helpful in letting off some of the pressure of ourselves.
I love that. And that's like, so now we have a whole nother reason for you to come back on the podcast down the road, just to talk about pressure and all these kind of things. Because here's the thing. Now I have to mention this. Now I know I'm one person away from Carol Dweck. I'm kind of like a fanboy of Carol Dweck. So at some point, I'm going to have to say, hey, does she do more podcasts?
Yeah, well, my access to her is what actually was the impetus for me to finally more intentionally start a podcast of my own, Chain of Learning, because I was invited to an event where she was speaking as an influencer, so I could interview her. And I said, all right, well, it's time for me to start a podcast. Yeah, so she was episode, I think 4, or 3 or 4 of my podcast. Yeah. Amazing. Episode 3. Yeah. So go back and listen to Carol Dweck, because she talks about the connection between a growth mindset and a learning organization, and how do we make those connections. So it was amazing. I was so thrilled to meet her.
and for anyone that doesn't get the reference, Carol Dweck's like the godmother of growth mindset, pretty much.
Yeah. She created it.
She created it. So yeah, it's a whole thing. But before I start going down that path, Katie, this was an absolute delight. I love having folks that are operating in similar spaces to myself on the show. I love us being an advocate for why people like ourselves need to coexist. And like you said, we're actually using this time as a way of reflecting. I learn from every guest that comes on. You've helped me get better today. I've really appreciated that. And I know our listeners have all benefited from it too. But before I let you go, if people don't want this to be the last of Katie Anderson, how can they learn more about you?
So absolutely connect on LinkedIn. I'm KBJ Anderson, or Katie Anderson, my full name, on LinkedIn. And my website is KBJ Anderson. Part of my maiden name was Brian Jones. So kbjanderson.com. I have a book, Learning to Lead, Leading to Learn. So really all about how you're bringing in that learning mindset. And then, of course, my podcast, Chain of Learning. So bringing back all of these elements, that all comes back to learning. And it's learning is the source of our growth and our success.
Beautiful. And all that information will be in our show notes for anybody that didn't have a pen at hand to write it all down. So do not worry, it's all there for you. But in the meantime, Katie, again, I appreciate just your time, your generosity of insight, and look forward to just us remaining in contact and coexisting in one another's worlds, because this will not be the last that I see of you. I know that for sure.
Likewise, Steve. I really look forward to continuing our learning journey together.
It was such a pleasure to spend some time with Katie. And before I let you go, I think it's so important to reemphasize one key detail, and again, there's so many I could have chose from, but this is one key detail around making space to learn by understanding when it is we are in performance. Too often when we are on this hamster wheel that is life, that is our careers, that is our business, we don't realize that there are moments where we can be learning, and then there's moments where we are in fact performing. And I would argue that those moments of performance, they're not as frequent as we might assume. I think we get this belief in our minds that, hey, we're performing all day long. And you can maybe make your argument around that, but I'm going to push back and just say right now, there's going to be a couple of moments each day, a few moments each week, where the standard to which you deliver is under some form of an assessment. Can you pinpoint those moments? Are you able to identify where it is in your day, in your weeks, where there is a true opportunity to assess how it is you showed up and delivered, how you performed when you needed to perform? I assure you that there are moments like that throughout your week. But you need to be diligent and strategic and aware to them. Know when they're coming so that you can then, to so much of Katie's points, you can then make the time, strategize the time, schedule the time to learn, to reflect, and understand how you can prepare better next time for when that opportunity to perform comes up again. But if we don't take the time to get off this hamster wheel and identify where and how we are actually being asked to perform in the work that we do, then it's so much harder to learn from the way in which we are actually performing and the results of those performances. So again, couldn't appreciate Katie more in terms of those insights that she provided. They resonated with me as a former athlete, as a former swim coach, as the coach that I am today working with executives, and just being a husband and a father and a brother and all the things. Just we are all performing in some way, shape, or form, but we all have ways to learn from the way in which we perform as well. So hopefully you took something either like that or something else from our conversation. But in the meantime, folks, keep coming back. Katie is simply the most recent of a list of incredible episodes. If you've not been listening up until this point, go back and binge listen to some of our previous episodes because the quality has been nothing short of phenomenal recently. I am learning so much simply as an interviewer. I would love to learn what you're learning as a listener. Please feel free to reach out, Steve at GrowthReady or podcast at GrowthReady. You can reach out to us and let us know how are you learning? How are you growing from what we are providing? Please don't hesitate to reach out to us. But in the meantime, folks, make sure you're subscribed, drop us a rating, and sharing the show with anybody in your world. And I look forward to doing this again with you very soon. Bye for now.
Thank you for tuning in to Growth Ready. If you liked what you heard and are feeling ready to grow, be sure to leave a 5-star rating, subscribe to the show, and share the episode with someone you know is ready to fuel their growth journey today. We love our community, so don't hesitate to reach out to us at podcast@growthready.com. And until next time, we are Growth Ready, and you will be too.